Association, and I am also representing the Downtown Business Improvement District tonight. And on behalf of the BID, I welcome you to workshop number 4, the final workshop for the Downtown Master Plan. It's been a year-long planning process. I've seen many of you involved in other public workshops, in other stakeholder meetings, in presentations we've done, and I really appreciate you being here. As we go through the evening's process, I want you to be respectful of other people's opinions and ideas. Be sure that you've signed in. We have your contact information. Be sure that you fill out a ballot before you leave. And please know that you can follow the planning process through the Downtown BID website. We're happy to have you here. When we talk about a downtown master plan, why do we need a plan? We want to lay out the future of our downtown. We want to provide direction for positive change. We want to have a feeling for how much and what type of development is appropriate for our community and for our downtown. We want to provide reasonable certainty and predictability for potential investors and property owners. We want to provide guidance for day-to-day decisions for government officials and provide a better visual definition for our downtown. We want to help our citizens understand proposed changes and put them into proper context. And we want to define obligations for government officials and those who follow in decision making. When we talk about implementation, a lot of the questions we get are, who's responsible for implementation? So I want to take you through just a quick exercise. If you are a staff member or a board member of the Missoula Downtown Association, please stand up. If you are a staff or board member of the Downtown Business Improvement District, please stand up and stay standing. If you are a staff member or a board member of the Missoula Parking Commission or the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, please stand up. If you are a member of City Council or County Commission, please stand up. If you are a city staff member, please stand up. If you are a downtown business owner or property owner, please stand up. If you are affiliated with a nonprofit organization that's vested in downtown, please stand up. If you're a consumer of downtown, please stand up. You are responsible for implementation. You are responsible for implementation. This is our plan. This is our community. I'd like to also introduce to you Rod Austin, Director of Operations for the Downtown Business Improvement District. If you have not met him, you will. He is very important to what we're doing in downtown Missoula. Thank you for being here. And now I'd like to introduce our consultants. Most of you have met them at some point in this process. They've been with us since January, and they have been hired by the county commissioners to guide us through a visioning process for the Missoula County Fairgrounds. They are George Crandall, Donna Rambula, and Jason Graff with Crandall Rambula of Portland. That is a firm, one of 36 that applied for this position. We are happy to have them here. They've done an exceptional job. Sub-consultants joining them tonight are Tom Moriarty of ERA Associates out of Washington, D.C., and yes, you should stand up. And Brent Campbell with WGM Group. Thank you. And then some of the other consultants that have been involved with this process but are not here tonight include Lorraine Roach of the Hingston Roach Group, Dennis Burns of Carl Walker, and Mike Robertson of Carl Walker. So without further ado, please help me welcome George Crandall, Donna Rambula, Jason Graff.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you all for coming out tonight. We were introduced as consultants. I feel like after a year that I'm a resident of Holiday Inn and of your community. And so away we go. It's good to see some familiar faces. How many of you have been to a prior presentation? Would you raise your hand? Okay. All right. So we won't spend much time on this first part. Now, we always give you a little bit of background because anytime we don't give you a little bit of background, people say, well, what happened originally? Who is doing all of this? And so bear with me for a few minutes. Many of you you've seen this. This is a shortened version. You will also notice that on the table you have some response sheets and a limited amount of information. There aren't many questions now. The whole idea behind an implementation strategy, a master plan. It has now come to an implementation strategy, is that in the beginning we are very broad and it narrows and it narrows. And so we are in this narrowing process, and as it should be, there are some tough choices to make, but there aren't as many as we had before. So away we go, and the project purpose then is summarized in this slide. It's about vitality, economic development in your city center while maintaining quality of life. Study area then within the red boundary. The context, the downtown, as it relates to a couple other of your key features, your airport and the university. The purpose of the meeting tonight then is to talk about a draft, and that's what it is, a draft implementation program. In other words, what happens next? Get your thinking and answer your questions. The agenda, as it always is, there's a presentation, then a discussion, 2 parts. And going back then, the planning process, 3 phases, the starting, designing, implementing, going from the general to the specific. A schedule starting back in January. And here we are then, meeting number 4. The team is led by Ellen Buchanan and Linda, and the green arrows would indicate the work being done by our firm, and as Linda indicated, we are assisted by some very capable consultants, whether it has to do with traffic, market analysis, parking, historic, or business recruitment. And those consultants have all been very active in the preparation of the final plan. Our firm specializes in revitalizing cities. That's what we do, and we work around the country. And so, going back to meeting number 1, we said, what are your issues and concerns? What do you want to see addressed in this planning effort? And that was back in March. The idea was to develop project objectives. Many of you turned out, and you filled out this response sheet. And we said, what are your top 3 issues and concerns? And oh, by the way, you can include any others you would like. And you did. Out of that came this set of objectives. And these are your objectives, and they have informed us as we have moved on through the planning process. They are not, there's no hierarchy intended here. They're grouped under land use and circulation and other. And so these are the things that we needed to respond to as we moved on through the planning process. You can see the evaluation is pretty arbitrary. We said, well, if things were good, you probably wouldn't want them addressed, so let's call them all fair. But the idea here is that when the master plan is completed, we should be able to color those circles without anything in them green for good. Second meeting, then we came back. In the first meeting you said, this is what we want addressed. We came back to you then with alternative concepts in May. There was a fundamental concept summarized here. The idea is to make this as simple as we can so that we can all communicate the big ideas. And in the center where you see that red dot, that's what we're calling a retail hotspot. It is bracketed by an employment anchor up in the triangle and one down on Madison, the blue dots on the left and on the right, the Higgins hip strip on the south, what we're calling rail yard housing or rail yard development, where you see the yellow then up in the north, and perhaps a depot square or roundhouse park as we called it, and expanding the festival waterfront along the river, and perhaps a cultural campus in where you see the light blue. The retail hotspot then was central. And the reason it was central is it is the most difficult thing to get right in a downtown. Everything else is pretty easy. You have to be very disciplined, and there are things that work and that don't work. So the idea was to create a very walkable, pedestrian-friendly area that would be the focus of retail. It doesn't mean you wouldn't have retail in other places in the downtown, but you'd be highly disciplined about how it would be located within this zone and how you would park it. And so it is then centered on Higgins in Front and Main. And it added about 220,000 square feet of retail, and the new retail then is shown in the pink, and that seems to be showing up that way on the screen, and the existing was in the stripe. And so the idea is to build on the existing retail and add new retail to it. Now, it doesn't mean you won't have retail up Higgins, because that is a commercial street and everything should be done to make that successful as well. But this is where your primary concentration would be, and we would like to see edge-to-edge retail then along these streets. We gave you a response sheet and said, let us know whether you're in favor, a yes or a no or other, and you also provided many comments. In general, almost everything did receive a positive response. Meeting 3, then, we came back to you with refined alternatives, and that was in September. There was a capacity diagram, and where you see colors, those would be new buildings, the orange would be housing, the purple would be office, the light blue would be cultural, and some of the pink then commercial. The idea was to really build out your available sites that we could find in the downtown and then see how much development you could or would want to accommodate. Out of that came a primary land use framework, the red being that retail hotspot, the pink being commercial, the purple then being employment, and the orange being the high density housing. The gray areas, basically nothing is proposed. Those are healthy, stable neighborhoods, and they need to remain as they are. There was a circulation framework having to do with bicycles, streetcar, auto, and commuter, perhaps rail at some time in the future. We again asked you to fill out a response sheet, and generally you were in favor of the proposals, and you can see the numbers here for the location of the primary land uses. The diagram looks something like that. For the retail, we suggested that Macy's be promoted as and retained as an anchor retail development in the downtown, and a new parking structure be built to provide the retail parking. We've called that Patty parking structure now East Front parking structure. You were in favor of that, and you see the before and the after. Macy's then is in that, the red. The parking structure is in the brown, and it was a proposal for another development then just to the north of Macy's, which we're calling 139 East Main. It would be a mixed-use development. You were in favor of the Festival waterfront concept, which expanded your open space along the waterfront. Positive response to the Depot Square concept, and the idea was to have a space up at the end of Higgins Avenue in front of the depot, a place for public assembly. Pine Street concept, generally people were in favor then of that, running that center landscape medium then over toward to the west, over to the hospital. The triangle concept, positive response, a mix of office, higher density housing, hotel, and retail at the ground floor. West Broadway, the idea then was to make some improvements to the street, a gateway roundabout up at Toole and Broadway, or California. You can see the uses then proposed along the street, and some ideas of how that section might work. As far as employment, the government center concept, the idea was to keep the government, the county, in the downtown. The cultural district, you can see that we had a few more no's on that and others, and we understand the concerns, but generally people were in favor of it. The idea was to have placeholders for a cultural district, performing arts center, perhaps the university museum. There was some concern about the buildings which are shown in black. We identified the contributing buildings, and we said, well, that could be a phase 2 not built on, and perhaps those could be used for artists in residence at some time in the future. But the idea behind that blue area was to provide not only a place for those 2 cultural facilities I mentioned, but to then aggregate them with perhaps with the Children's Theater and a new library then on front. Higgins Avenue Bikeway, protected bike lanes as opposed to on-street bike lanes, and we explained what the difference was. And generally, you were in favor of the protected bike lanes, and that would be where you see the blue then on Higgins. Those bikes then are alongside the sidewalk and parked cars alongside, separating the bikes in from the traffic. Suggestion was that that system extend across the bridge, and that received a positive response. Broadway Street Bikeway, the idea was to carry that protected bikeway then along Broadway, east-west, on the south side of the street where you see the blue, and that received a positive response. Riverfront trail linkages, positive. The idea was to complete the already wonderful system, unique system that you have in place, and improve access then into the downtown. Connections being made where you see the yellow arrows, new crossing then where you see the green arrow. Catalyst and time-sensitive projects, we talked about what those might be, and that received a positive response. And we have taken that information and then moved it now forward into this meeting number 4. Special Design District, the idea was to protect many of your wonderful historic resources you have in town and the existing neighborhoods. That was positive as well. We said there are a number of design issues that at some point need to be addressed, and here they are when we talk about these special design districts. And we had a suggested solution, and this will be done at some time in the future. And so here we are then, meeting number 4. And at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Don Arambula, and he's going to change the pace a little bit just to keep things interesting. Don?
Thanks, George. So what we're going to go through is there's going to be a summary document. It's for the entire master plan, but there will be a specific emphasis tonight on the implementation strategy. So when we look at the master plan document, it will take all of that information that George had previously described and put it into written text that can be hopefully adopted in the future. So here's a refinement of that fundamental concept diagram again. I won't dwell on that, but that's a central part of it. And when we think about these, this is kind of the kitchen table document, or diagram, you might even think about it. So if you were to ask your husband or wife what was the meeting and you weren't able to attend this meeting tonight, this would be the simple thing that you'd want to lay out and say, here's what it's all about in a nutshell. So that's kind of how we look at it. There would be an illustrative plan. This would be used, in a sense, as a sales tool. It's something that you would see in windows of businesses that local people who are trying to promote business could lay this out and say, here's some of the key sites and some of the ideas on it. It's intended to be more of an art piece. There will be a land use framework, and from this, this will be the wellspring of some potential recommendations for some future adjustments to possibilities to your zoning that you might have. The circulation framework, this is the basis for possible future adjustments to your transportation plans. So with that, there is an implementation strategy, and that starts with the master plan itself. And George, do you want me to keep rolling through this? So we'll hit this too. Okay. And he's lurking here because he knows his piece is coming here real quick. So what we've done is we've gone through block by block, as if you didn't know this, and we've done conceptual designs of this. So what we were able to do is to assign square footages, number of units, and this information has been very helpful because then we can fold it into some of the transportation modeling, compare it back to some of the market work that Tom has done and Lorraine has done, and we have a little bit better certainty of how this is performing, and also then use that information as, to inform our parking strategy. So what did we get out of that? It looks something like this: 220,000 square feet of retail, office, more than 500,000, commercial, and we differentiate between retail and commercial this way. When we talk about retail, it's a sale of goods and restaurants. Those two things. Commercial is a sale of goods and services. So you also get the restaurants, but you also, those include things like banks, offices, dry cleaners, and those things that are vital for your downtown, but doesn't have the discipline that the retail does. And then also a hotel for your tourism and other things that you have in the downtown. There's a piece on sustainable development. I'm going to let George do this piece, and I'll get back.
I get this piece because this piece has troubled me the most as we moved on through the process, and you had identified sustainability as one of your goals. And we're often asked about it, what that means. We've often heard the term. I think it's often misused. And people think about green roofs and green streets and bioswales as maybe being sustainability, and it is partly, but there aren't major savings from that. All those things are extremely important, but what we said was, how do we relate this plan? How do we create something here or suggest something that really works for Missoula that's different than anything else that we have been involved in, and certainly we are motivated by what you see here. Some of the environmental issues that are being discussed and the economic issues, the rising energy costs, and even though we have had a little backpedaling on gasoline prices, we assume that those will go up again. And so these are issues that your plan needs to address if it is truly to be of this century. So we went back and we looked at energy use by sector. These are national statistics, and they have changed very little, surprisingly, over the years, because we have done a lot of conservation work over the years, and these percentages basically have remained the same. 4 sectors, and you see the percentage of energy use in the U.S. in each one of those sectors. Now, in the 3 sectors, industrial, residential, and commercial, the strategies for saving energy have a lot to do with building codes. And those are really often a state function or a national function. You can do a little bit locally, and but basically it's tougher for a community to deal with those. Build more high-density housing, for example, is something that saves some energy use. But the big savings are in the land use or in the transportation sector, which uses about 1/3 of the energy in this country. And there are a couple of big concepts, we think, which have the potential for a huge payoff. And we're calling this one being balanced city centers. Balanced city centers would be a city center that provides all the things that you need so that when you move from your house on any one day, you can go to the center and there is a job location there. There is, you have all the retail and shopping facilities that you need to meet your requirements. The cultural, recreational, and business opportunities are there as well. The idea is that there is a center that provides for all of your needs. There is also, would also be a pedestrian and bike-friendly street system, and of course, great transit. Now, how does all of this work? Well, it's kind of like this. If we draw a 1-mile radius and we said say you can bike from 1 mile out to the center, and that would take you 5 minutes. So it's like the 5-minute walk, which is the magic distance. This is the 5-minute bike ride from the center, then out 1 mile. And that's a typical development in this country. Not that it has anything to do with bikes, but you have residential development or a bedroom community. Now, what happens in one of these bedroom communities is that these trips that you see here, these are the typical trips we all take each day. This is a national average. You have a fewer trips in this, by the way. We think you're 8 or 9, but this is a national average, and this is typically what people travel to. Business obligations, personal family, shopping, social recreation, work-related, that's that work trip, and then, of course, the other being school, church, and visiting friends and relatives. So the center should have the things that you need so that in all of these categories, that would be an ideal. But what happens today then without the center is the auto trips move out then of the residential areas to find the things that they need. You all need, we all need. And so autos leave. And these trips then are often long and these uses aren't aggregated anywhere, and so they are often quite spread out. Now, in a balanced center development, in that center, 1/4 mile radius, that's that little orange dot, you have all the land uses that you see on the right. There is enough retail to accommodate the residential. In other words, we look at the population within this area, and it would require about 500,000 square feet of retail to satisfy the market demand created by that residential. There would be enough office space, commercial job space to satisfy the demand created by that residential. And that's why we mean balanced. It's all then in the center within that 1 mile radius. What happens then is the auto trips, instead of moving out and going out to the edges, they come from the residential areas into the center. And so this happens. And this is not for all trips, but for most trips, they come into the center. And so you have shorter auto trips. It doesn't mean you have fewer. Now, some people might walk, but basically they're shorter auto trips. Now, the third model that we then can look at is lay a system of on-street bike lanes over all of this so people then can take that 5-minute ride from the outside edge into the center. Typically, we think you get about a 10% maximum mode split. In our community, we get about 8% today. That's in Portland. We think that you, from what we hear, have about 7%, which is great. But basically, we think that the 10% would be the maximum number of trips that would be made. In other words, 10% of all trips would be on bikes if you had a wonderful system of on-street bike lanes. And those bike lanes typically look like this. They're on street. And the issue always is safety, that bikes and cars and buses and trucks don't mix very well, and we're all a little frightened of getting on these bike lanes and riding then with that traffic. So this is the bottom line. If safety concerns are limiting bike ridership, what can we do? Now, the people who will ride with the traffic are what we call athletic cyclists. They love it, and they're very good at it, and they're expert in their practice. But that's not all of us. These are the people that we would like to get riding bikes into the center. The commuter, the family, the shopper. And so if we go to model number 4, the balanced center development with protected bike lanes, we think you can get a 40% mode split. And that's based on numbers from other countries, the Netherlands, for instance, and Denmark, where I rode some of these systems. And so there's a protected bike lane. It's next to the sidewalk. There's the car parking. You're not riding with the traffic. And it makes all the difference in the world. And when that happens, you get these kinds of people riding that typically you would never see on a bike because of safety issues and concerns. So by making a separation, we stimulate bike travel. Here are a couple of numbers. Bike use comparison. The U.S. typically, these are averages again, it's typically 1%. You are doing so much better. You have this wonderful beginning system of protected bike lanes, certainly along the river. But when you try to move into the downtown, as you know, watch out. In the Netherlands, you see in a couple of places the 30-40% mode split, and we see higher than in many other communities. We picked the one with a population of 33,000 because we wanted a big one and a small one. And so what happens, you get shorter and significantly fewer auto trips. And so what does this translate into? Household gasoline expenditures. Now these are broad averages, but they're not too far off. The 21,900 miles per year is what the typical household travels, and that's a national statistic, and that's because most households have more than 2 cars. So that's household. And you see with a balanced center, with the shorter trips, we think that drops down to 13,000, and with the balanced center protected bike lanes, it could drop down to 8,000 miles per year. That translates, and this is $4 a gallon gas, by the way. Household gasoline expenditure, you can see in a typical household running 4,000, the balance down to 2, and the balance, by the way, looks like this. If we laid that balanced center development over your downtown, it might look like this. There's a quarter-mile radius, there's a 1-mile radius, and you can see it covers a very large area, and it includes most of the intense uses in your downtown. The hip strip kind of slips out of that, and so we probably ought to have a blip on this center going over to that side of the river, but nevertheless, this is highly abstract. We wanted to see how you compared. And so if we then look at laying the protected bike lanes over that center, you already have this wonderful system along the river. We're talking about then making those missing connections and then connecting it to the downtown, having the protected bike lanes on Broadway, then on Higgins, up then along the railroad track. So basically, you can move around east, west, north, south through the downtown. And where you see those orange dotted lines, you can then move out into the neighborhoods, and we would hope that at some point those would be protected bike lanes as well. And so in the end, it's about economic stimulus. And so you see the number of miles saved given these different models, and it's considerable in either balance center or with the protected bike lanes. This translates into, for instance, into the balance center, $34 million a year that people are not spending on gasoline. That means that the money stays in your community and is spent on things that you need and desire, and that money does not go to the multinationals, go out of your community and go overseas. In our community in Portland, we find that we are driving 20% less miles in communities of a similar size. The calculations show that we are saving $2.6 billion a year in our local economy that stimulates our local economy that typically would be flowing out of the economy. So these concepts are good business, they're good for the environment, they're good for the and good for the individual. And so we're suggesting that you're uniquely positioned to take advantage or to capitalize on what you have already started with your compact downtown, your compact center, which we are talking about enhancing, your existing system of protected bike lanes, which we think can be enhanced. We think you could be a model for the nation. And so we think that sustainable design could be turned into a green with the adopted master plan, because it is a wonderful broad concept that not only pays off, as I said, for the economy, but for the individual, and in many ways for the health of the community. And with that, Don is going to take over and talk about catalyst projects which promote that sustainable concept and economic development and quality of life. Don.
All right. Well, in implementation, we've got a series of subsets of importance, and the most important piece of this is the section that we call catalyst projects. And when we define catalyst projects, it is what you see here. It's the ability to make other good things happen economically. So they aren't done just because they're a nice project or a good thing, but they spur other good things to happen as a result of their implementation. So here are those catalyst projects. Everything that's indicated in red or black, these are either private development parcels or public infrastructure improvements. So the first two of these are the things that we've already talked about, which is the Macy's improvements to their site, and also this Front Street parking structure, which we previously called the Patty Street structure. So here's a little diagram. The north is to the top of the page, and the top diagram shows what the existing conditions are. You see Macy's there with a parking lot to the side of it. There's a parking lot that Macy's has and partially owned by Holiday Inn, a little public area included on that. And we replace that site with a parking structure that would have some ground floor uses. And we anticipate and hope over time that we can reserve a space for Macy's expansion. We know that to be competitive, the store is a little bit undersized and needs some updating, and we want to make sure that over time that this is considered to make it competitive with those retailers in the mall and out on reserve. So how does this look like? So I'm turning you around a little bit. Now you're looking out towards the southwest. That's the new First Interstate building that's under construction. In the background there, front cuts up through the middle. And here's Macy's where that expansion would be. The multiple-story Front Street parking structure that would serve the retail and some of your existing businesses and future business such as First Interstate. So and also, by the way, if we get that performing arts center and some of these cultural things, we can also use that at night for some of those uses too. So it's strategically located to serve not only the retail but some other uses. It would have an active ground floor, so it's not just this faceless big parking garage that you may see in some cities, but it has an active edge to it. Has easy access off of Front Street because we know many people are visitors and we need to be able to drive into this, and it needs to be easily recognizable and accessible. So this has been designed with that in mind, and so that's that project. The second one is what we describe as 139 East Main. It's essentially the north half side of the Macy's block where you see that number 1. So from the alley up to Main and from Higgins over to Patty. And the intent here is to identify a major mixed-use development that can accommodate, where you see pink, a hotel or a condo. It should have self-contained parking. Essentially, we say should park out at the ground floor. It should contribute to that retail hotspot with some ground floor retail. And it might look something like this. Again, turning you around, this is looking towards the northeast, an aerial view. In the foreground is Higgins, Macy's as you see it there, and that's some of the characteristics that we would see for it. One of the key ideas here is that thinking about Macy's and providing the opportunity, if they even need to get larger, can we provide a second floor linkage to the retail proposal that might be in this block. So while we don't know if that's going to happen, part of the planning process is providing placeholders, so if that was needed, it is not precluded at this time. The thought is at this time that the alley would be open, but it really should be designed to be a little bit more pedestrian friendly, so because there may be some cut-through uses in that area. The next two projects are Front Street, a realignment of the road. As you know today, there's a little bit of an awkward V at that intersection. And this helps the Orange and Main Street anchor project. So what this does, it creates a larger development site. That realigned public area could be gained as development area and a larger footprint, which could accommodate a barbell anchor that complements the Macy's. So in tandem of these, you have two major uses that will help strengthen and draw more uses to help your local retailers that are in between that in the retail hotspot. So what does this look like? Here again, you see where number 5, the intent with that would be new development area. Of course, there's some utilities and other things that need to be thought about and relocated there. We are aware of those, and further clarification and study and cost assessments need to be done to make sure that this is viable. There are some complications with some existing owners. Tangle's Hair Salon, going through their parking lot, they need to be made whole, and then the scheme that we have, in fact, gives them more parking by expanding some of the area into the public right-of-way. So we need to think about all these things, and it would look something like this. A secondary piece of this is that this might include, above that ground floor anchor use, would be some upper floor housing. And we know it's an objective of your downtown in your city to provide more affordable housing. This could be an ideal location for that kind of housing. It provides a large amount of it, and it's in a central location. So this might be something that might be thought about as we go forward with the plan. And the next project is a large reserve of parking at Orange and Main, a new structure where the TV station is. And the point of this one is we know all these businesses here, like many of them, are going viable concerns. They should stay there as long as they want. But planning is about anticipating needs in the future. And if we need a major retail anchor in the development of Riverfront Triangle, we're going to need a large parking reserve that is easily accessible from your major roadways, Orange, Broadway, and this site works well because it's also a large floor plate. So we think it can happen, but it should only happen once those existing users agree to it, and if they agree, they can find an equal or better place to relocate their businesses. So what does that look like? You can see this, the parcels that would need to be assembled. This would require a vacation of partial of the alleyway. And then again, we'd like to have some more retail and commercial uses at the ground floor, as you see in the lower diagram. Looking at that diagram in perspective, looking more towards the northwest, Main on the left, Orange between the buildings, and Broadway to the right. The gray is that parking structure, multiple floors with the ground floor uses, and with good access off your major roadways, Broadway and possibly even Orange. And finally, the last projects happen in the Riverfront Triangle Development Phase 1. Currently, the city's redevelopment agency has what's called a request for proposals from developers to look at. You can't read these. It's a track 1 and track 2, where you see number 2 on the existing site. And the intent and hope is to get a interest from the development community for a hotel. And there would also be room for additional housing where you see the orange going up towards the intersection of Broadway and Front. So this we see is because of its strategic location next to one of your greatest amenities, the river, and additional open space that we could develop here would be a prime site for market rate housing that would help contribute new customers with considerable buying power into your downtown to support your existing businesses in a site where we think that we can get quite a bit of intensity to meet some of your regional goals for intensification and building more housing in the downtown area. So what would this look like? And don't be afraid about the heights. This is something that we think that they may be smaller, but we want to have the ability to study the heights and what is appropriate to get in here with the consideration of things such as view corridors, making sure that in important areas we push away from the trail system, so in fact we're crowding Front Street and adding more green space along the river. And you see the hotel with the pink too, which would be also very helpful. And all this obviously needs to park out. And along with that, there's the final one. I shouldn't have said the final and last one, but the final one is really the government center. And this has been one of your the key pieces of your objectives. And the intent here is, and this is a drawing you saw before, but I'll re-emphasize it, is to build a shared city and county facility that was be built where there's an existing parking lot, make some improvements for the transit center and on-site with ticketing. There may be some indoor waiting for inclement weather. Other things should be considered as part of this, but really memorialize this and get an emphasis of keeping these vital functions into the downtown and with the site that works for them. Okay, so that's the building proposals for private development and some of the key street pieces. Along with that comes what we call the second piece of implementation is green transportation projects. So going back to George's definition of this BCD, this centered development, those transportation improvements are essential to do that. So what they do, and the definition of it is here. They give you the ability to reduce transportation spending, and in turn, this increases your local spending capacity. So what are those? So here's a list of these, and I'll go through these one by color, but this is what they are assembled. The first one of these has to do with Higgins Avenue improvements. And so there is a couple of things that we need to just identify. What's the length of the project? It would go from the depot at the north all the way down to the intersection of Brooks, down to the south. And there would be obviously needs for some basic improvements of signalization, especially when we start talking about one of the next projects, which is a two-way of Front and Main, so that those need to be developed. So we start with what your existing conditions are, which is showing a 66-foot curb and a 16-foot wide sidewalk with on-street parking and 4 lanes of traffic. And so the proposal here is to suggest some further study for this area. So what we want to do is to establish some commonalities in a baseline condition. So for example, some of your catalyst projects, whether it's the Macy's or the 139th, if they need to make sidewalk improvements, they can do those with the assurance that they won't have to be changed, so you're not spending money needlessly, but we can implement projects today as we go forward with further refinement of the Higgins Street proposal. So the proposal at this time is to further study of the 4-lane option and the location of the bike lanes. So the commonality piece of this is from the building edge to a pedestrian zone or a sidewalk zone of 12 feet, hold that constant with all alternatives. So we establish some certainty and predictability for the development of the area. So the differences here is that you've got, with a 4-lane of Higgins, the bike lanes, one option would be to do the standard bike lanes in the street a little bit wider, or the option would be to do the protected bike lanes that George explained so well. So we've done quite a bit of work, a lot of detail on this. We're highly confident of it. There are issues not only with the street section, but also the intersections that need to be resolved. We find that those are, whether it's a protected lane or an on-street lane, the right turning movements at intersections are problematic and most dangerous, and we need to think about that. Alley intersections are a big deal, and also left turning movements for bicycles. All of this needs a little bit more study and a little bit more agreement from all members of the community before we feel comfortable making a solid recommendation. So here is that with the protected bike lane, with the same amount of detail for that. So the other option is to look at 3-lane. We have WGM, our traffic engineer, Brent Campbell, has been active in the Downtown Streets project over years. He has developed traffic models. He feels that there is some the reason to look at this from a long-term transportation improvement of some of your turning movements, and so that should be considered as part of this study. So again, we have the commonality of the sidewalk zones and then the options of location of the bike lanes as part of that. So here it again, that 12 fit, whether it's 3 lanes or 4 lanes, it's a uniform piece, so we can take some of that out of play. So again, we've done some of the typical street sections for the standard bike lanes and for the protected bike lanes. We haven't stopped north of Higgins, and we've continued this study to consider what happens with the bridge. So in any event, we think that this needs to be improved, and this illustrates a protected bike lane option. One option could be to keep bike lanes, which is illustrated at the top, keeping 4 lanes of traffic shown here. And the bottom is that section for the bike lane, with maybe cantilevering of sidewalks extending and widening the existing bridge if you were to keep 4 lanes. There are some improvements that would also need to be done for the hip strip, continuing down to the south. We ran through this a little bit earlier in our last alternatives phase, so we showed some how this would work in the hip strip, and with a protected bike lane option, again with that constant 12-foot option, or with on-street bike lanes as illustrated here. With these two sections, very similar to the north side. We know you get a little bit tighter, and additional study, especially from 4th and 5th all the way down to Brooks, needs to be resolved, because that's the missing link into making this an effective system. And we think that at this point we don't have enough information to make a solid proposal for that. But as the green line indicates, that needs to be thought of as this entire system. The second piece of this would be Broadway improvements, and like Higgins, there needs to be some study about intersections and signalizations for that. The proposal is to maintain in the core a 4-lane section the way it is today, and have an option of putting that bikeway on the south side of the roadway, and it would be bidirectional. It's a little bit different, and there would be it would be something like this. This is a more common approach in most European and actually Canadian cities where these are done, and it would look something like this. Heavily used bike signals and other innovative things are used as part of that. Or we could keep a standard bike lane on this either way, but in the sense we do really want to make sure that we get bicycle improvements as part of this. The second transportation green project would be front and main street improvements, and those essentially are changing the function of the street from one-ways to couplets to two-way traffic. There are some business and environmental and energy savings to do this. We know that when cities change their one-ways to two-ways, that you can reduce trip lengths by 1.5 times, and it's a positive for your downtown business environment, because you get AM and PM exposure. So if I've got a restaurant and all my drive-by is in the morning, it doesn't benefit me. If I can split that to more of a 18-hour-a-day drive-by, I have some benefits for that. So there's some subtleties and some real benefits for that. So what do we have today? Essentially, we're keeping the same configuration of what you have today. Essentially, now you have angled parking on Main. In large measure, some areas it's not exactly like this, but this is a generality. What we're saying is turn the cars. It's a restriping effort and maybe some curb extensions at the corners, but essentially the curb to curb distance stays the same. On certain other areas, such as on front, you have parallel parking, and again, we just simply say flip that and add some pedestrian and landscaping and other improvements, similar to what we showed on front. Next are these filling these missing gaps, filling the teeth in the smile of your downtown bikeway system. There are disconnects that need to be thought about, and those are either through acquisitions of easements, land purchases, or other innovative ways. For example, in Portland we have floating bridges that take bicycles to areas where we cannot get onto private property. All those should be explored as part of the waterfront trail connections to make this complete system that loops all the way from California all the way to Van Buren, and then links up in the north to create a system that ties you up to the neighborhoods to the north as part of that. And obviously we showed the diagram going to the south, but this would be the fundamental backbone of your downtown off-street recreation system. Streetcar study is the next piece. We know, frankly, is that we see a repositioning in the importance of transportation infrastructure throughout the country. Lots of cities are being are interested in it. The feds have more emphasis now on streetcar than they've had in generations. They're successful projects. The project we're showing here would generally extend along, let's see, it's Spruce all the way to Ryman, and this would be a local circulator. A long-term strategy really needs to think about this system that runs in traffic. It's not an exclusive right-of-way. It uses the signals that you have in your city today, and that should be thought about not only with the downtown, but a comprehensive major improvement study that looks at how it connects to the university, to your other centers at the mall and over at a Reserve and out to the airport. Should be thought about this, but the first phase should be thought about connecting your major employment centers around St. Patrick's over towards the university and this new Madison Street anchor or employment anchor through the downtown is to get the ball rolling, and think of it incrementally. So finally, we've got a set of projects that we call quality of life. And these are less measurable in large part. They affect the day-to-day life, and they affect the soul of your community, the reasons you live here, the things that are memorable, the postcard images that make this place special. And we want to enhance these and make these better for you. So those start with some things that what we typically call the living room for your community, the day-to-day, the heavy lifting of events where you have ability to have a hard surface for events and places. For example, your city Christmas tree should be here. We'd like to incorporate some of your existing buildings into things like cafe, and it needs to be activated. And consideration should be thought of how this connects up to the north to the Roundhouse Park and the development on the north side that's illustrated here. So it needs to be safe and friendly, unlike your existing crossing further to the west, which is a little bit hostile. We think we can do this better and make this an attraction, not something that you dread crossing. Next would be Pine Street enhancements. You've got a wonderful green belt median that goes through the Pine Street neighborhood. Take that expression, extend it, use it to link and knit and be a focus for development along the northern parts of your downtown. This could take many different forms. It should incorporate existing and planned things such as your art museum should be a central focus for it, government center, and then it should be thought about it again from Madison to Owen. Cultural district projects, a placeholder, again, the illustration in the bottom shows a building that could as easily be the existing buildings there for an artist colony. But what we want to do is make sure that we have a place where we can do a performing arts center, a conference center, and even a museum. And with that, we want to have a place for public sculpture that extends and provides a linkage to your existing neighborhoods in a meaningful way today. The connection at Kiwanis Park today is out back and behind. We need to make this a feature and a connection. So the thought would be a sculpture garden as illustrated, and it may be as playful as this. And it's up to you to decide what it should be in there, but think big. Caras Park expansion, we've gone through this a little bit, but the idea is to take, if we're adding parking structures, here's an opportunity for you to do your fairs. The surface should be mostly grass, not highly programmed, so it can be changed in a moment's notice for any number of different types of activities or whatever might happen in this area. So it should be highly flexible and should have more of an emphasis of green and then on paved that it does today. So the next piece of this has to do with the things that you need to get moving on now. What we'd like to say is that successful plans are based on things, are when you develop early momentum. So it doesn't do you any good to take and adopt this plan and sit on it for 2 years. You need to get moving on it now. So the next part of this is really about establishing an action plan for your downtown implementation strategy. So what are the first things that we think you need to do? First of all, you need to say that this is adopted and this is your guiding document for policy decisions that will follow up on that. Secondly, there's a code rewrite that most of you may be aware of, but the code rewrite is anticipated to to be completed in the spring of 2009. It sets a foundation for any future changes in the downtown. That needs to be set so that we're building the foundation, and then we build the structure and the roof above that over time and not worry about the details yet until you get that in place. So the subsequent code updates, we think that would address some of the issues of neighborhood preservation, height, view corridors, all the things that I think some of these images that we're showing you will bring up should be initiated, we believe, sometime following that, and we hope, and our proposal is that that happens soon in the summer of 2009. And along with that, you're going through your capital improvements project list right now, and there are some things that we need to make sure that get on that list because it only happens like the cicadas over every few years. So you need to get this thing happening into your list now. So things like a streetcar study and some of these other objectives that we have for your major streets, such as two-lane and other things, need to be part of that list. So what we'll do is create this action plan. Don't even try to hurt your eyes by reading this, but there's going to be a lot of detail on it. So what we're going to do is on the left side, we'll list in all those catalyst projects, the time-sensitive projects, the things that are most important, because we could list 70 projects here, but we want to give it into a manageable bite-sized piece here so that we can stay focused and keep all on the same page. Along with that, there'll be a schedule, there'll be responsibilities, and there'll be a discussion of how this will be financed. The question always comes up, where are you going to get the money? That's got to be vetted and thought about sooner than later, and we need to establish strategies for that as part of this action plan. Okay, so some of the issues that we need to address over time have to do with neighborhood protection, and this would then, as we mentioned before, could be part of a next step, because the plan in itself directs policy and it doesn't make any regulatory changes as part of the master plan. There really is those specific neighborhood issues should be thought about starting next summer as part of a process for map amendments after the adoption of the code rewrite. Because the code rewrite essentially changes text. You've got an outdated code that's 30 or 40 years old. It needs to be cleaned up so it's more efficient. On top of that, we can make these essential changes for your downtown that will be much more effective than they would if we did it today. So that's the suggestion. Hip strip is a big consideration. We want to make sure that there's an emphasis on the south side, not only within the planning area, but the edges. Your very vital and very healthy neighborhoods have the potential to be impacted by development, and likewise we want to extract the reasonable changes within the hip strip that will contribute to your neighborhood center on south of the river. So again, no regulatory changes are part of this plan, but specific neighborhood issues such as height, parking, other issues can be further clarified as part of this map amendment process that we're suggesting happening next summer. Okay, so there are some additional tools for guidance of the day-to-day plan for implementation, and I'm going to sit down for a while and let Tom Moriarty run through this piece. And Tom, you want to hit it?
Thank you, Don. Well, there are a number of studies by different specialists on the Crandall-Rambula team. We were one of them, and we have prepared last May a study of housing and the retail market demand in the Missoula market. Obviously, a couple of things have changed since May. You may have heard about it. I don't believe that any of the findings that we've determined in this study are incorrect, but I think the timetable for implementation is going to be a little different, and we may need to shift some of the tools that are put in place to carry it forward. That retail strategy, one of multiple strategies, has been developed, and the implementation responsibilities, as many of you, when you stood up at the beginning of this evening, rest with the BID, with the MDA, with the MRA, the MPC, the MCDC, and the COM. There are a lot of people involved in implementing a retail strategy. You know, as complicated as it is to develop a shopping center or a subdivision, it is geometrically more complicated to remake a city. We don't have site control. We have multiple conflicting sometimes or different timetables for priorities. So this is not an easy thing to do. So it will take all of these folks and more to carry forward a realistic implementation program, but we do have that strategy developed, and as you saw, there's a report written that has a great deal more detail than we can get into tonight. The downtown retail strategy here and everywhere else in the country is affected by what's happened really since late last August, early September. We saw the beginning of this when we were here for Workshop 3, but nobody knew how bad it was going to get or how fast. Just as a couple of benchmarks, commercial real estate activity between October of last year and October of this year is down 50%, one half. $14.5 billion in deals were canceled. Now that doesn't sound like a lot of money compared to $700 million bailout, but it is quite a lot of money. $14.5 billion of real estate activity gone, postponed, delayed, canceled. Part of the offshoot of this sort of cascade of economic difficulty has been chain store bankruptcies. Stores that were over-leveraged, that had too much debt, that may have ordered too much inventory, like Circuit City, now being liquidated. Mervyn's now being liquidated. Linens and Things now being liquidated. This is not somebody coming in and saying, I'll buy your business. This is saying there is no business. Sell out to the walls and we're gone. This is an unusual circumstance that I don't think we've seen in 30 years. It's been 30 years since I saw a trend that dropped this far, this fast. Remember in the Carter administration when mortgage interest rates were 20%, 21%? That's not to say that things can't get worse, but you know, it's been pretty bad before, but we've had a great run since, and now we're going through a pretty serious correction. From a retail standpoint, October is a key month. When there's a strong October, that generally suggests consumer confidence and expenditures leading into the holiday season, and this was the worst October in 30 years. That suggests a very bleak fourth quarter for the retail industry in the country, and here in Missoula, frankly. Most retailers generate the bulk of their annual profit during the holiday season, during that last quarter, and when we have a bad one, it spills over into the first quarter and second quarter of next year. I believe that we will see more bankruptcies occurring among chains between January and June, and I think you'll see them on Reserve Street as well as in other parts of Missoula. This is a national problem, and the news is not good, and it's going to take a while to crawl out of it. That difficulty with the retail market then translates into real estate. When a retailer fails or goes dark, the landlord is stuck. There's no lease rental income coming in. When the properties are not profitable, there's no market to sell them, and so transactions go down, and then public revenues drop down. Property taxes change, assessments go down. So this cascade effect is really quite dramatic and quite serious, and it's, I know that expression perfect storm is overused now since the movie, but from a retail standpoint, this is kind of a perfect storm of bad circumstances coming together. Just to give an indication of some of the things that are going on, Macy's, the largest department store chain in the country, down 3.5%, and that's considered pretty good over a year ago. Macy's store guidance has been, I think, pretty effective. The Gap, in contrast, down 16% from October to October. Nordstrom down 16%. Saks Fifth Avenue down 16, almost 17%. Abercrombie down 20%. And Neiman Marcus, the luxury retailers generally don't see negative impacts in these kinds of recessions, but this is a different animal. Neiman's is down almost 28% from a year ago, rolling into the holiday season. The only major store chain nationally that saw a net increase was Walmart. Most of the others in the value sector are flat. Costco, some of the others have just not shown any positive growth. So this is a scary market. Now the reason that becomes critical nationally is that because we're not so much a manufacturing economy anymore, our economy for the last 10 years has largely been driven by consumer spending. 2/3 of it is based on consumer spending. So when consumers are worried about spending, that ripples through everything else. So this is not a happy circumstance for a while. Now, There are two ways to react to this. The first is it all gloom and doom forever? And the answer is no. We will come out of this. There's a pretty wide range among economists saying it'll be a year or 2 years. I have an economist joke for you. 3 economists go out to an archery range, and one of them fires an arrow, and it goes about a yard to the left of the target. And then the second one gets up and fires an arrow, and it goes about a yard to the right of the target. And the third economist says, "We hit it." So there's always this range that economists look at to say, well, what makes sense here? I believe we're looking at a year to 18 months before we start to see the economy turning around. We typically have seen a downturn at the end of every second president term, regardless of party affiliation. So that was to be somewhat expected, and then a bounce when the new administration comes in, although this is a pretty deep crevasse that we're in right now, and I think it's going to be a pretty low bounce. So what do we do about this? How are we supposed to react to this unusually serious set of circumstances? Well, in the near term, the answer is to hunker down and focus on survival, not on growth. This is not a time when retailers can get the credit, have the sales, the sustained sales viability to start to look at expansion. We're seeing now European investors coming in and buying American retailers, and Asian investors coming in and buying American retailers because we're vulnerable. So this is not a growth period. What you can do locally, and we strongly recommend this, is to shop local. And by that I mean, and I am an absolutely honest, downtown biased retail person. I love downtown areas, shop downtown. Generally speaking, I would say if you can save $3 going to Walmart, or you can spend $3 more and support a local retailer, a locally owned business, a downtown business, spend the extra $3. They're going to need your help. Over the next year and a half, this is going to be tough sledding for the retail sector. And so buy local from locally owned businesses. Because Macy's has stayed with us downtown, and we're hopeful they're going to continue to stay, we'll give them a buy as a chain. Go to Macy's and shop too. But if you can avoid going to major chains, there is a direct economic impact on this. Local retail expenditures tend to turn over, where some of that money goes to the bank, assuming they have any left after this quarter. That money is then going to be loaned to somebody else or put in circulation, or a supplier spends it somewhere else. Those dollars roll over, turn over 4 to 6 times locally before they leave the Missoula market. If it's a chain store, it's once or twice. So you do have an indirect benefit by spending with your local businesses. Shop local. Spend with local ownership. Now, what this is buying us in the near term is a little more time to think about this. With the zoning rewrite and other things, this is the right time to adopt a plan, this plan, and to put in place policies to position downtown Missoula to rebound more quickly in 1 or 2 years. You already have a very strong base of business and infrastructure network and downtown commitment, and these processes and groups like the BID and the MDA and the MRA and so forth, you've got a lot of the tools in place. It's just we have to ride this out for a while. We think it's important to keep Macy's downtown, not because the whole future of downtown hinges on it, but because it's going to look a lot tougher if they leave. So we really think it's important to keep them, both for practical and for symbolic reasons. And then to seek, when it's appropriate down the line, another retail anchor use down on the west end. The office and employment function we talked about. 2 of your strongest market sectors here are healthcare, and the St. Patrick's Hospital expansion is a great thing because it keeps jobs and people coming down to the downtown area, and keeping the government center here. Both very important things that might not look like much, but all of these pieces come together to make something significant. So those are near-term things over the next couple of years. In the longer term, as this plan is adopted, as the zoning rewrite is completed, as the details are sorted out, continue to concentrate compact growth in downtown Missoula. It's the right thing to do. It makes sense economically, it makes sense environmentally. Blending those markets in the balanced center is something that will keep downtown Missoula healthy and growing. We had originally assumed that by the beginning of '09, we'd be ready to have a retail recruitment program to complement your already strong base of retailers. The downturn in the economy and the retail market in particular suggests we're now saying push that out a little. People are not going to be expanding. So pick that up again in a year to 12 months, or in 18 months. grow your professional office space downtown. That's provided for in the plan, and those employees spend for lunch, and if we can get them to live nearby and ride their bike over or walk to work, so much the better. And then finally, as it is proven to be economically viable, and only then, consider how to implement a performing arts center or a meetings facility downtown. You know, we have a sort of rule of thumb that says if you're going to have one of something, try and get it downtown. So over the longer term, you do have a strong opportunity here. The country and Missoula have had moderate but steady growth, and we think there's a long-term prospect that's quite bright. It's just we have to get through this next bumpy period. George?
I think you've got affordable housing.
Oh, yep, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, George. Another critical element, we know there's an enormous need for affordable housing in Missoula. This is not unique to you, and it's a challenge everywhere. The reason developers don't build affordable housing and workforce housing is it doesn't make money. It's not profitable. And so it requires a public subsidy of some kind. That's the cold reality. It's not the answer I'd like to give you, but if we need more, we're going to have to find ways to subsidize the gap between what it costs to build and operate these types of housing and what the qualified people who need this housing can afford to pay. There's a financial gap between the two. It might be local government, it might be nonprofits, it might be a combination, but that's the only way that's going to happen. We are very pleased to see the Mayor's Housing Initiative developing strategies and tools. In our report, we have a whole list of tools that range from allocation of bonus density for providing it, all the way through direct cash subsidy, and all sorts of variations in between. This will be administered through OPG. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. I feel like I've been in a movie that's running a little too long, and so we're going to speed this up a little bit. There is an employment strategy, and it's summarized here. I'm going to leave that up for a second rather than spending a lot of time talking about it. And it has to do with health care, high tech, retaining city and county services, working with the university. The things that you already have going for you, you build on. There is a tourism strategy, and it is summarized here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This will all be available for you to look at online, and the reports will also be available. And you are a great tourist destination, and the idea is to capitalize on that. There is a parking strategy that's been developed as part of the master plan, and it's going to be reviewed by your parking commission and downtown businesses and citizens after the first of the year and finalized in early 2009. It's going to be adopted then in early 2009 through a public process. Lots of information for you to consider, and it will be implemented by the parking commission. Next steps, the most important projects. This is just a summary now. We're just about at the end. Those yellow lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, those are catalyst projects, and they are the most important. At the same time, we are including the realignment of Front and Main as part of the retail strategy as being very important. To update the downtown streets plan doesn't require a lot of money to do this. It's what is that final design? How will Higgins to Brooks work in Front and Main? And what configuration will we be using? Do you want to use in your bike lanes? And then finally, to develop the streetscape design so that it is wonderful, one of a kind, and the contract documents. So you are ready then for construction when you want to pull the trigger. You have a response sheet on the table, pretty straightforward. There's a catalyst projects. We've summarized those, a yes, no, or other, and your comments will be appreciated. What about those? And they're the catalyst projects. What about those green transportation projects? And there they are. And again, these materials are on your table so you can refer to them. Quality of life projects, summarized on this graphic. The Balanced Center Development, which is a big concept, which helps you establish priorities and policies as time goes on, which emphasizes growth and development in your center. And the Bicycle Center Development, which says that maybe there's a terrific opportunity here to increase bike ridership in your community because of its compact nature and its climate and the fact that you're already positioned to do this. And so if everything in the master plan is adopted, we think that you'll have all greens over on the right if it's evaluated at some time in the future when all of this is implemented. So we are ready for lights and any questions you might have, and then table discussions. Now, we're not going to take 25 minutes for table discussions because I don't think we have that much time, and you are so quick here that typically in about 15 minutes you've discussed everything you want to discuss, and then we'll have the table reports. And so a few questions first before we turn this back over to you. Any questions? Anyone want to raise their hand? Or do we just want to get on with the table reports? Yes, sir, right here.
Technical question. When you show square footages on these charts, is that of the building or just building?
The total building area, all floors.
Okay, not the footprint.
Not the footprint, all floors, yeah. Total square footage. And we will be available to come around and answer questions. So you can raise your hand later on, and we'll be right there. So let's start the table discussions. The idea is here we are at 7:30 or 8:30 and 8:45 or 8:44. We will have table reports. Please fill out the response sheets. And we're going to ask one person from the table to stand up and give us the flavor of the discussion of the table in 14 minutes. Thank you very much. If you have to run, we won't let you out of the room unless you fill out a response sheet. We have a volunteer for a table report, and we have mobile microphones that can come around to you. When you're ready to make a report, raise your hand, and someone will show up with a mic and give us your name and your report. So, any volunteers for a report? Table report, raise your hand. Oh, here we go. Whoop, the hand went up over here. Do we have a hand? Going once, going twice, and sold. Yeah. Yeah, may we have your attention, please? Yeah, go ahead, your name.
Hi, my name is Kaya Peterson.
Yeah.
And I've been goaded into representing this table. Our conversation was all over the map. So lots of questions. I think in general people are very interested in the plan. A few questions. Looking for a little more information on how downtown housing is going to work. It looks like that's not really part of the initial catalyst. Some question about how cutting down lanes of traffic downtown is going to be impacted with the in-migration over the next 20 years. What the narrowing of sidewalks might mean for some of the retail and restaurants downtown. A lot of conversation about how development focused down near Macy's, and that the Central Square area up near the X's isn't really central. So how does that work? Is it really a central square? Does it fulfill that purpose, given the location? Some concern about what happens to the rest of our community when all of our resources are focused downtown right now. And then also some question about the transient population. So clearly a lot of different areas covered.
Now, you have a lot of questions. I'm not sure whether we take the time to answer those or not. Let me just take a quick a flyby.
Okay.
And Dawn should feel free to do that too. As far as the sidewalk widths, we're suggesting the minimum be 12 feet, and if we put the bike lanes on that, it goes up to about 20 feet, which is more than you have today. 12 foot we think is minimum in our town because we have smaller right-of-ways. We have 60-foot right-of-ways. All our sidewalks are 12 feet. We are much more urbanized than you are. And so we're suggesting with the protected bike lanes that could be substantially larger because that separation is really creates a pedestrian bike zone. So we think you're okay. We wouldn't suggest anything less than 12 feet. If you go to a 3-lane on Higgins, then that could even get wider. Housing is important. It's not one of the catalyst projects because initially it doesn't stimulate other things, but you certainly need it, and we have lots of housing sites in the downtown, and we'll have a housing promotion program, an affordable housing program. Tom has that in his program as well. As far as we're focusing on Macy's because a department store is a rare resource in a downtown, and it attracts other shoppers into the downtown because of the broad offering. And if you lose your department store, it is always a loss, and all retail suffers. So we want to see all your local retailers healthy, and so it's important then to retain Macy's. The square is up in the north end of Higgins. Simply because we have space up there, it becomes an anchor at the end of the street. We don't really have room in the middle of the street for any kind of an open space of a substantial size. We've looked all over town. The idea is to create an open space that really functions, that has active edges. We think that's a great long-term opportunity and provides a bridge then an underpass, to the railroad property up on the north for a huge amount of housing, should that site then open up at some time in the future. So it's part of that long-term strategy. Those are some of the questions. What was another one? And then we'll move on.
Investment in the rest of the
Investment?
In the rest, how does it affect investment in the rest of the
Investment in the rest of the community. You're still going to have investment in the rest of the community. And you are doing some planning work now to talk about how the rest of your community should form over the long term in the coming years. And I would hope that in some of those other areas you'd get into a similar amount of detail that we've been able to get into here. Now, in other words, how do you create centers, walkable, bikeable communities in the other parts of Missoula as well? So there's supporting, they're self-supportable, but at the same time they're linked together. So I think that's part of a bigger strategy. But this is, you typically take care of your heart first, and then you deal with your extremities. So your priorities are right. You're starting with your heart, and if you have a healthy heart, your extremities then tend to be okay. Weak heart, watch out for your extremities. So thank you very much. Another table report. A hand goes up and a microphone moves around. Another volunteer? Oh, one over here. The microphone is on its way.
This is a table of all hip strip business owners. We briefly discussed the fact that we love the bike lanes, that a lot of our clientele are people that ride bikes, so the whole concept of having good protected bike lanes all the way down to Brook Street, we like that idea a lot. Also, Park. I was cutting out. Karis Park, getting rid of the parking, putting the parking somewhere else, and using it for more bigger events. You talked about these quality of life constructions of having public gathering spots and stuff like that. We think Karis Park would be a wonderful place for more stuff like that. But our primary topic of conversation, which I admit I brought up, was the relationship between affordable housing and services, in the sense that you can subsidize a whole bunch of people living downtown, and in the aim of preserving the socioeconomic diversity of downtown, but without the services, it's worth nothing. Because if you have to leave downtown and go to Reserve Street to bring your kid to daycare, for example, or go out to the good food store on Russell and 3rd to go grocery shopping, those arrows you had regarding the trips, all of a sudden that gets all screwed up. So the question was, which we didn't really have an answer for, is okay, you can promote low-income housing, but how do you promote the proper range of services to make sure that that affordable housing and that quality of life is maintained?
And the answer to your last question is we look at the Balance Center development. We look at what it would take then within that quarter-mile radius or half-mile diameter, what needs to be there to support the housing out to a mile radius. And we'll be providing that material to the city. It'll be part of the master plan. and over a period of time, one would want to see the city promote the kinds of services, try to attract the kinds of services that you want in the center, so you come in rather than having to go out. You're absolutely right. It doesn't do you any good to be living here if you can't find the services. So I think it is an imperative that we address your concern very directly. Thank you. Another volunteer. Hand goes up. By the way, a table can pass if they want to. You don't? No, you can't. No, you can't? Okay. Jason says you can't. Can't abstain? Yeah.
Hi. The first thing that we talked about was one of your first slides that showed the most important thing in one of the first meetings was that people wanted better pedestrian activity. So it's really critical that the sidewalks get the highest priority as you move forward. So that was one of the things that we talked about. The other thing was that there was, we discussed the different traffic lanes, and we talked about how 3 lanes was a nice idea downtown, so that 2 lanes of traffic can keep moving but not move too fast, so they have plenty of time to look at the stores and decide to stop and shop. And that 2 lanes on the bridge would be great because we could actually walk side by side across the bridge, but we were intrigued with the idea of a cantilevered photo op in the middle, so you could stand and actually watch the sunset without blocking traffic. So, let's see. I was concerned about the plan for parking, that there's also a plan for removing that parking in the park area along with building the parking, so that there didn't become lots of empty space downtown because there was too much parking. And I think that makes your downtown look dead. So I think it's important to keep that percent together so you don't have too much parking. And I think that was it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We'll give a clap for the other people who reported too. There we go. Okay.
Let's see. I wanted to start off by a show of hands from people here. How many people are under 40 in the room? How many people under 30?
What?
How many people under 20? We had 2 of the people under 20 at our table, and it's interesting to think about how when we do planning that we seem to do planning as a, you know, it's the elderly part of our community. And we're not elderly necessarily, but we're not necessarily planning for the people who are 15 or 10. And I appreciated your slide that you had earlier about the people who are biking with their children on the back. Our table was generally very supportive of the vision that you had put forward in the slides. We did have a few questions. There were some negative comments about the streetcars that were proposed in the slides, particularly that they seemed like a lot of money to connect some areas of downtown and not connect to the rest of the community very much. And we're concerned about the cost of how that might go. Let's see, there were some comments about design excellence, that all of these ideas really depend on how well they're done. If they're done beautifully, the city will be vital. If they're done poorly, the concept doesn't fly. There were concerns about affordable housing and how the housing that was proposed within your presentation could possibly be affordable, and I think there was some acknowledgement of the need for subsidy in there, but much of the housing can't be subsidized, I think. And I think there was also some discussion about where the money can come from, particularly for the public infrastructure improvements that can't be funded by private investment, probably, or at least mostly can't be funded by private investment. How do we get the money for that in our very tight public infrastructure dollars that we have in Missoula?
Thank you. I'd like to just make one comment. The gentleman talked about whatever you do, do it well. and make sure that there's a high degree of design excellence. And that's, I think, an important reminder for us all, because it will make you stand out. It will make you very special, and then, frankly, it costs probably no more to do it right than to do it wrong. And so it's just a great reminder for us. Thank you.
Next table.
A volunteer, a hand, anywhere. The runners are waiting. Let me see.
I'm Bob Wachtel. I'm currently a member of the Bike Pedestrian Advisory Board for Missoula, and primarily my concern is with biking and walking. Our table discussed many of the functions, and again, we'd like to second many of the comments of the first table, the concerns there, but also we're quite pleased with the overall concept. I think we kind of reached consensus on the balanced center development. That's very good. We have a kind of a difference of opinion on the table with respect to the cycle tracks and protected cycles. Some are very much in favor of. Others of us, some of the more experienced cyclists are less in favor of the cycle tracks and needing to, or the desire to be out there with the traffic as a possibility. One thing I didn't see discussed in any of the plans was parking for bicycles.
Parking is a huge issue for bicycles, and it depends on the system that you select as to how much you're going to need. And if you start getting into, it's tough enough with a 10% mode split, and you start getting into 30 and 40 and 50% mode split, bike parking is a huge issue, and that should be the part of the design as the design is refined depending on which direction you want to go in. Thank you for that reminder.
I have another question from the same table. Today, the UFDA, the Urban Fringe Development Area, I think was adopted, the plan is adopted. And so I'm wondering, what's your relationship to that planning, and what is the number of units, dwelling units that are planned for the downtown area that we're talking about?
We haven't seen the final, but the draft we saw had in excess of 2,000, I believe, units of housing, and our proposal is over 3,000. So we're consistent with that. We're consistent with the concept with our balanced center development, focus on the services and the retail and the commercial and the office with the UFDA planning. So I think that we're consistent with it. And we'll review that to make sure that if we've missed anything, that we reflect back on it and look at it one more time.
Thank you. Another volunteer over here. Yes, sir.
Well, we talked really pretty favorably about everything and the concepts and everything. And our conversation mainly went to implementation. And we talked about how we were going to organize the implementation phase and talked about the groups that might be doing that. And so I think that was the positive aspects of the plan, and let's get it done, I guess is kind of what we talked about mainly. And I just noticed we all have something on our table here that this could be the first thing in getting the plan implemented before it's even adopted. There's a big shop local opportunity this Sunday. And if you look at your little handout, there's a holiday open house of a bunch of downtown businesses. And so I guess along with the implementation, we would say let's start on Sunday getting the thing implemented and come downtown and shop local.
Thank you. Another volunteer anywhere? We've got one.
Just in the interest of getting things done, we talked about the cycle track versus bike lane issue, and I'm just glad that you gave us the option of looking at both the 3 and 4 lane and also the 2 other scenarios, because it is a lot less expensive to get the bike lanes in earlier, and it requires less treatments for the intersections. So just leaving that open, I think will be a good discussion for the BID, MDA, others to have in the future. Wide sidewalks would be nice. I've seen the 12-foot sidewalks in Portland, and they are really nice, but you do have smaller blocks too, plus your narrower right-of-ways, which makes a big difference. So if we can keep 16 foot, especially on Higgins and Broadway, which are pretty wide streets, that might be better for retailers. And my personal inclination is just, if you could change, going back to the excellence in design, if you could change the rendering for the railroad housing, because it just looks like corporate anywhere, and it looks like a terrible gateway for Missoula. Please change that, because if investors are looking at what the downtown plan is, that's just like anywhere USA from the 70s and 80s, and please change that if you can. It's just a rendering. It'll be just as cheap as doing it the right. Anyway, sorry.
Hey, thank you. Another volunteer? Oh, we got a hand over here.
This is not something we discussed, just something I'd like to share with the group. I've had recent experience biking in 3 European cities, Brussels, Belgium, Paris, France, and Toulouse, France, that have programs of renting bicycles. You know, they're just big stands of bikes. And in Toulouse especially, they were very much used, I noticed. And these cities all are making that effort to really encourage bicycling. But Toulouse especially does not have the good facilities. So we have a lot of beginner bicycles, but they're out there with no lanes. And there are no protected bike lanes that I recall in any of those cities.
Thank you. Any more volunteers? I'm looking for hands here. And if we don't have more volunteers, Linda, I think we're about ready to close the meeting. Oh, we have one over here.
Just one more. And actually, it's just a thank you to you and your staff and the consultants that you've pulled together and everyone that's put in all of the time and effort. I know from the very beginning I have been so impressed with the way you have tried to involve the community, the way you've opened it up to get as much dialogue and input as possible. And I think that Missoula will be so much better served because of the efforts that you've put in, the efforts that everybody here. Thank you all so much for coming and taking part in it. And I would just personally like to say kudos to you and your company and your consultants.
I will have the second last word here, if I might. I would like to compliment all of you for your participation in this planning effort. We not only have these big meetings where you've turned out and you've given us guidance, but we have had Linda's schedules over these 3-day periods for one meeting after another. We literally meet with hundreds of you. The discussions have been wonderful. This is truly your plan. You have shaped it. It has your fingerprints all over it. And you have been wonderful, open, receptive, and just great to work with. Thank you so much. It's been a great experience for us.
There's really no words to follow, Kim and George. So we are adjourned, and thank you. And the bar is open, and I know it's a work day tomorrow. So really appreciate your commitment to this process and to our downtown. Good night.